Imagine this. A little girl sits at a kitchen table, crayons scattered in every direction, sunlight streaming through the window. She's humming a tune, completely lost in her own world of make-believe. Her mother, standing at the counter, smiles warmly until she looks at the drawing. Her smile vanishes. What the child has drawn doesn't make sense. Not for her age. Not for the life she's lived. It's a crude sketch of a man, lying face down in the woods. A red scribble stains his shirt, and next to him, drawn in the innocent wobble of a child's hand, is something chilling, a knife. The mother stares at the picture, unsettled. "Sweetheart," she asks, trying to keep her voice calm, "where did you see this?" The girl looks up, almost casually, and says, "In my dream." But later, when investigators look at that drawing, they will realize something terrifying. This child has unknowingly sketched out details of a real unsolved murder that had gone cold decades earlier. Before I tell you how a child's innocent drawing would unravel one of the most haunting cold cases in America, I need you to do one thing for me. If you love mysterious, emotionally gripping true crime stories that keep you up at night, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because I always bring you stories that twist reality in ways you never see coming. The beginning of the case. The year was 1992, in a small, tightly knit town nestled deep in the Midwest. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and crimes were usually limited to stolen bikes or bar fights. But one warm July evening, that peace shattered. A man named Daniel Whitaker, a father of two, and a beloved high school football coach, went missing. He had gone out for a short evening walk after dinner. He never came home. By midnight, his wife reported him missing. A search party formed the next morning, combing through wooded trails on the edge of town. That's where they found him. Daniel was discovered in a shallow ditch just off a hiking path. His body was twisted unnaturally, and the earth around him was disturbed like there had been a struggle. He had been stabbed multiple times, his watch and wallet missing. But the most disturbing detail, the one that haunted detectives, was the position of his body. It looked almost staged. Like someone had placed him there deliberately, as if to send a message. The small-town police launched a full investigation. Suspects emerged, an old rival coach, a drifter seen in town, even whispers about a secret affair, but every lead fizzled out. The case went cold within a year. For decades, Daniel's murder remained unsolved, locked away in dusty evidence boxes, haunting his family and the community. And then, years later, a little girl picked up her crayons. The drawing. Fast forward to 2019. In a different town, far from where Daniel's murder took place, a family sat down to dinner. Their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was unusually quiet. She had been drawing in her sketchbook all evening. When she finally showed her mother what she'd been working on, it stopped her cold. The picture showed a man lying face down, a red smear across his back. Next to him was a knife, drawn in thick, dark strokes. It wasn't just disturbing, it was eerily specific. Her mother gently asked, "Honey, why did you draw this?" And Lily answered in the most unsettling way possible. "Because he asked me to." Her mother's blood ran cold. "Who asked you to?" "The man in my dream," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He told me to show people what happened to him." The mother tried to dismiss it as just a nightmare, a child's imagination. But when Lily kept drawing variations of the same picture, night after night, the mother began to worry. And here's where things took a terrifying turn. One of Lily's relatives happened to be a retired detective. When the mother nervously showed him the drawings, his face went pale. He recognized the scene instantly. It was almost identical to the crime scene photos of Daniel Whitaker, the unsolved cold case from 1992. The mystery deepens. The retired detective was stunned. Lily had never been told about the case. The murder had happened years before she was even born. There was no way she could have known the details, the body lying face down, the knife, the blood on the shirt. But the similarities didn't stop there. In one of her drawings, Lily included a strange detail, a bracelet on the man's wrist. It was something Daniel's wife had mentioned at the time, a small braided bracelet he never took off. Yet, this bracelet had never been made public. It wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't in the reports. Only investigators and Daniel's family knew about it. So how could a 6-year-old girl, in another town, decades later, know this? The detective stared at the drawing for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. Finally, he whispered, "I think she just reopened this case." Suspenseful pause. Now, what happens next will take you down a rabbit hole of eerie coincidences, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations that no one, least of all a 6-year-old girl, should have ever known. But before I continue, let me ask you this: if you're hooked right now, and you want to hear how a child's dream could crack open a decades-old unsolved murder, drop a comment below telling me your theory. Was this a case of reincarnation, a psychic connection, or something even darker? I want to hear your thoughts. Daniel Whitaker's case had been ice cold for nearly 30 years. But with the stroke of a crayon, a little girl unknowingly ignited one of the most bizarre and chilling true crime investigations of modern times. And as detectives began to pay attention to her drawings, they realized Lily wasn't just doodling. She was trying to tell them something. Something only the killer, or Daniel himself, could have known. Whispers from the past. The detective who first saw Lily's drawing couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Daniel Whitaker's body the way it was discovered in 1992. Face down, twisted, staged in that eerie way. And now, 3 decades later, a 6-year-old girl had drawn it almost perfectly. He told himself it had to be coincidence. Kids draw strange things all the time. But then his mind kept circling back to that bracelet, the small woven band Daniel wore, a detail never released to the public. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He picked up the phone and called an old contact at the state police. The investigation reopened. Within a week, Lily's drawing had made its way into the hands of the Cold Case Division. At first, the officers were skeptical. "You're telling me a first grader cracked a homicide?" one investigator scoffed. But when they laid the drawing side by side with the original crime scene photos, the mood in the room shifted. The similarities were chilling. The bracelet. The way the knife was positioned. The placement of the body. There was something here. And so, for the first time in nearly 30 years, the Daniel Whitaker case was reopened. Lily's dreams. Detectives approached Lily's mother cautiously. They didn't want to scare the little girl, but they also knew she might hold the key to details they'd missed. One afternoon, they sat down in the family's living room. Lily clutched her crayons, swinging her legs as she perched on the couch. She seemed completely unfazed by the attention. "Lily," one detective asked gently, "can you tell us about the man in your drawing?" She looked down at the paper in her lap. "He talks to me sometimes," she said. "In your dreams," the detective clarified. She shook her head. "No, sometimes when I'm awake too." Her mother's face drained of color. "What does he say to you?" the detective asked, keeping his voice calm. Lily shrugged. "He says he wants people to know what happened. He says he was hurt because of what he found." The room went quiet. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Because back in 1992, one of the strongest theories was that Daniel had discovered something he wasn't supposed to see. Something that had cost him his life. Clue in the sketch. Over the following weeks, Lily continued to draw. Sometimes she would scribble forests, sometimes just random shapes. But often, the same disturbing scene appeared again and again: the man, the knife, the blood. But one drawing in particular caught investigators' attention. In this sketch, Lily had added something new. Behind the man, faint lines formed what looked like a car. It was boxy, old-fashioned, something from the late 80s or early 90s. Investigators immediately pulled up the original case file. Witnesses back then had reported a dark sedan parked near the hiking trail the night Daniel was killed. But with no license plate, it had gone nowhere. Now, nearly 30 years later, a 6-year-old had drawn that same car. How? Unearthing forgotten evidence. With Lily's drawings providing fresh angles, detectives returned to the old evidence boxes. Dusty files, yellowing photographs, sealed bags with items that hadn't been touched in decades. They re-examined Daniel's clothing. They retested fibers with modern DNA techniques. And then, they pulled out a small item that had been overlooked, Daniel's wallet. It had been found several yards away from his body, empty. The working theory was robbery. But Lily's drawings suggested otherwise. In one sketch, she had drawn a triangle on the man's shirt. When asked about it, she said, "That's what he was looking at before he got hurt." Investigators didn't understand until they checked the wallet again. Inside the lining, hidden so well it had gone unnoticed, was a folded piece of paper. On it was a rough sketch of a triangle-shaped logo, along with numbers scribbled underneath. This had never been logged into evidence properly. Somehow, it had slipped through the cracks. The triangle logo was traced back to a company that had once operated on the edge of town, a chemical plant that shut down in the mid-90s after multiple safety violations. Was it possible Daniel had discovered something about this company? Something worth killing for? The first break in 30 years. As word spread that the case was active again, old witnesses began to surface. People who had been too afraid, or too overlooked, to speak before. One man came forward, an employee at the chemical plant back in the 90s. He admitted that Daniel had been seen near the property the week before his death. He had asked questions about illegal dumping, about records that didn't add up. And then, just days later, Daniel turned up dead. The witness lowered his voice when he spoke. Back then, everyone knew, if you asked too many questions about that plant, you didn't stick around long. This revelation shook investigators. Had Daniel uncovered a corporate cover-up that cost him his life? And if so, how in the world was Lily connected to it? Another chilling drawing. Just as investigators began piecing this together, Lily produced another drawing, her most disturbing yet. This time, she sketched not just the man, but two shadowy figures standing over him. Their faces were blurred, but one detail stood out. One of them wore a distinctive ring with a large square gemstone. When detectives showed Daniel's widow the drawing, her hands trembled. She recognized it instantly. Years earlier, one of Daniel's rivals, another coach, who had mysteriously come into money around the time of Daniel's death, always wore a flashy square ring. It had been noted once in interviews but never tied to the murder. Was this the missing link? Imagine being Daniel's family at this point. For 30 years, they had no answers. Just grief, silence, and fading hope. Then a little girl, who had never met Daniel, started drawing his last moments. And those drawings were now uncovering forgotten evidence, pointing towards suspects, and reviving leads that police had long abandoned. It was like Daniel himself had reached across time, through the innocent hand of a child, to demand justice. But here's the part that will make your skin crawl. Lily began to change. Her mother noticed she was having night terrors, waking up screaming words that didn't make sense. She would speak in a low tone, muttering phrases like, "Don't trust the man with the ring. They buried it near the river." And every time she woke, her drawings grew darker. The case was finally alive again. Detectives now had new suspects, possible motives, and even new physical evidence. But none of it explained the most unsettling question of all. How did a child know any of this? Was she channeling Daniel's spirit? Had she somehow tapped into memories not her own? Or was something even stranger happening, something investigators couldn't explain with logic? What they did know was this: Lily's drawings were leading them closer and closer to a truth that someone had tried to bury for 30 years. And the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Before I take you into the next part of this story, let me pause for just 1 second. If you're completely gripped right now and want to see how a child's innocent sketches could point directly to a killer, hit that like button so more people can find this story. Because what happens next is where this case takes a terrifying turn. The men with the ring. The investigation that had once been little more than a ghost story in a file cabinet was now alive, pulsing with leads that seemed to come straight from beyond the grave. And at the center of it all was Lily, the 6-year-old girl whose crayon sketches were turning into a roadmap of a 30-year-old murder. Her drawings had already hinted at a dark car, a hidden note with a triangle symbol, and most disturbingly, 2 men standing over Daniel's body, one wearing a distinctive square ring. For investigators, that ring was everything. Revisiting old suspects. Back in 1992, when Daniel was killed, suspicion briefly fell on a man named Coach Richard Rick Halpern. He was a rival coach in the neighboring town, known for his explosive temper and flashy jewelry. People remembered the giant ring he always wore, a gold band with a square-cut black onyx stone. At the time, he had an alibi. He was supposedly at a poker game with friends. The alibi checked out, and Rick walked free. But now, 3 decades later, Lily had unknowingly redrawn his likeness, the ring, the shadowy figure, the posture, down to unsettling detail. When detectives pulled Rick's old file, something else stood out. In the weeks after Daniel's murder, Rick suddenly came into a suspicious amount of money. He bought a new car, paid off debts, and even upgraded his home. At the time, no one connected the dots. But when combined with Lily's drawings, the pieces started to align. Pressure mounts. Investigators decided to quietly track Rick down. He was still living in the area, though older now, retired, and keeping a low profile. When detectives approached him about new information in the Whitaker case, Rick scoffed. "That was 30 years ago," he said dismissively. "You think I had something to do with that? Get real." But when they asked him to see his old ring, Rick's demeanor changed. His eyes hardened, and he muttered, "I don't have it anymore." Later, investigators learned he had pawned the ring just months after Daniel's death. Coincidence? Or cover-up? Lily's third transformation. Meanwhile, Lily's behavior was becoming more alarming. Her mother reported that she sometimes slipped into a trance-like state, staring at walls for minutes at a time before suddenly scribbling furiously on paper. One night, she produced a drawing so specific it rattled the detectives to their core. This time, it wasn't just the man with the ring. Next to him, she had drawn another man, balding, tall, with a scar across his cheek. When shown the sketch, one retired officer whispered under his breath, "Oh my God. That looks like Frank Dillard." Frank Dillard had been a mid-level manager at the chemical plant Daniel had been investigating in the days before his murder. He had been questioned back in 1992 but denied knowing Daniel. Nothing tied him to the case. But now, a 6-year-old's drawing put him at the scene. And then Lily added something chilling. She pointed at the man with the scar in her drawing and said, "He told me not to tell." Confronting the second suspect, detectives dug into Frank Dillard's past. He had moved out of state years ago, but they tracked him down living quietly under the radar in Arizona. When questioned, he denied everything. But investigators noticed his hand trembling when they slid one of Lily's drawings across the table. "This is you, isn't it?" Frank stared at the paper, his face pale. Finally, he muttered, "Where did you get this?" The detective leaned in. "From a 6-year-old girl who says Daniel Whitaker talks to her." For the first time, Frank lost his composure. He pushed the drawing away, muttering, "That's impossible." But his panic told investigators everything they needed to know. The river clue. Back at Lily's home, she made another eerie revelation. One morning, she woke from a nightmare and told her mother. They hid it by the river. Her mother asked, "Hid what?" But Lily just shook her head, repeating, "The river. The river." Investigators took this seriously. They combed the riverbanks near the old chemical plant. Days of searching turned up nothing, until a cadaver dog alerted to something buried deep in the mud near the shoreline. What they pulled out stunned them. It was a rusted knife, its blade broken, its handle wrapped in cracked black tape. Testing later revealed traces of human blood embedded in the grooves. DNA confirmed what everyone feared and hoped: it matched Daniel Whitaker. After 30 years, they had the murder weapon. and it had been found exactly where Lily said it would be. Emotional stakes rise. By now, the town was buzzing. Word had leaked that a child's drawings were somehow guiding detectives in an old murder. Some locals whispered that Lily was psychic. Others believed Daniel's spirit was speaking through her. For Daniel's widow, the experience was agonizing. She was both hopeful and terrified. She confided in detectives. "I don't know how this little girl knows any of this. But if my husband is trying to talk to us through her, then I need to know what he's saying. I need to know the truth." The family's grief, buried for 3 decades, was resurfacing with violent force. They were finally standing on the edge of answers, but the answers were darker than they ever imagined. The missing piece. Despite the evidence stacking up, prosecutors needed more than drawings and a recovered knife to convict. They needed a motive that tied Rick Halpern and Frank Dillard together. That's when investigators revisited the folded note with the triangle symbol found in Daniel's wallet. After weeks of digging, they uncovered a shocking connection. The symbol wasn't just a logo, it was tied to a secret fund used by executives at the chemical plant to pay off local officials and silence whistleblowers. Daniel had stumbled across it. And Rick Halpern, the rival coach, wasn't just a rival. He had family connections to the plant. His brother-in-law worked in upper management. Suddenly, the picture became clear. Daniel had uncovered corruption at the plant. He threatened to expose it. And the men with power decided he needed to be silenced. The terrifying warning. But just as investigators were closing in, Lily delivered one last, terrifying warning. One night, her mother found her awake in bed, clutching her crayons, whispering as she drew in the dark. When her mother turned on the light, her heart nearly stopped. Lily had drawn a picture of herself, lying in bed, with 2 shadowy figures standing at the foot. One wore the square ring. When asked why she drew it, Lily said softly, "They know I'm telling." At this point, the case was balancing on a knife's edge. Investigators had new suspects, a recovered weapon, and a motive tied to corporate corruption. But now, the little girl who had reopened the case might be in danger herself. And here's where this story takes a horrifying twist. Because as detectives pushed harder, someone tried to make sure Lily's voice was silenced, permanently. Before I take you into that chilling part of the story, let me stop here. If you're still with me and your heart's racing right now, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this, where innocence collides with darkness, are exactly what I always bring you. Silencing the voice. The investigation into Daniel Whitaker's murder had gone from a 30-year-old cold file to a living nightmare unfolding in real time. What began as the innocent sketches of a 6-year-old girl had now placed names, faces, and motives into the hands of detectives. But with every new drawing, every new revelation, the air around Lily seemed to grow heavier. Her mother noticed it first, shadows of exhaustion under Lily's eyes, sudden fits of silence that made her seem far older than 6. And then came the night when the danger they had all feared finally stepped out of the shadows. The break-in. It was just after midnight when Lily's mother awoke to a sound downstairs. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the windows. But then she heard it again, the distinct creak of a floorboard under weight. She froze. Her husband was out of town on business. The only people in the house were her and Lily. Clutching her phone, she crept into the hallway, just in time to hear Lily scream. She bolted into her daughter's room. Lily was sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror, pointing at the window. "There," she cried. "The man with the ring." Her mother rushed to the window, yanking the curtains aside. Outside, in the faint glow of a streetlight, she caught only a glimpse, a tall figure retreating quickly across the lawn. By the time police arrived, he was gone. But something had been left behind. On the windowsill was a small, greasy smudge, the outline of a hand. And on the index finger, a faint imprint in the shape of a square. A ring. Investigators alarmed. Detectives knew immediately, this was no coincidence. Someone connected to Daniel's murder had tried to intimidate Lily's family. It was proof that they were getting dangerously close to the truth. But it was also validation. Lily wasn't imagining things. The same men who had silenced Daniel 3 decades ago were now desperate enough to show themselves again. For investigators, it meant one thing. The killers were still out there. Protective custody. The next day, Lily and her mother were moved into protective custody. Officers kept watch outside the safe house, and detectives accelerated the case. But Lily herself seemed more unsettled than ever. She refused to sleep with the lights off. She clutched her crayons constantly, as if they were some kind of lifeline. And then, one morning, she handed her mother a new drawing. This time, it wasn't Daniel. It wasn't the men with the ring. It was a map. A rough, childlike sketch of the woods near where Daniel's body had been found. At the center, Lily had drawn a tree with roots spreading wide. Beneath it, a dark square box. When asked about it, she whispered, "That's where the secret is." The box. Detectives immediately mobilized a search team. Using Lily's drawing as a guide, they combed the wooded area near the old hiking trail. After hours of digging near the gnarled roots of an oak tree, one officer's shovel hit something hard. They unearthed a rusted metal box. Inside were papers, brittle with age, and a cassette tape wrapped in plastic. The documents were damning: financial records from the chemical plant, showing illegal dumping practices, bribes paid to local officials, and notes about neutralizing threats. And then the tape. When investigators played it back, a familiar voice filled the room. It was Daniel Whitaker. The tape was a recording he had made just days before his death. His voice was calm but urgent as he described his suspicions about the plant, the money trails, and the threats he'd received. His final words sent chills through everyone in the room. "If anything happens to me, it will be because of what I found. And the men responsible will try to bury it." The net tightens. With this evidence, detectives finally had the missing link. Rick Halpern, the rival coach with the ring, had family connections at the plant. Frank Dillard, the manager, had the means to orchestrate the cover-up. Together, they had lured Daniel out, silenced him, and staged his body. But even as the case built toward charges, Lily's drawings took a darker turn. One evening, she drew something that left detectives shaken. It was a picture of two men in handcuffs, Rick and Frank, unmistakable in their features. But behind them, she had drawn a third figure. Taller, looming, faceless. When asked who it was, Lily simply said, "The real boss. The third man." This revelation rattled investigators. For decades, the theory was that Daniel had been killed by someone acting alone or by a small cover-up crew. But Lily's sketches suggested something bigger, that Rick and Frank were just pawns in a larger game. They dug deeper into the plant's old records and unearthed a chilling name: Arthur Keene, a wealthy industrialist who had bankrolled the plant. Back in the 90s, he had been untouchable: political connections, deep pockets, and a reputation that kept people silent. Arthur Keene had died in 2010. But suddenly, everything made sense. Rick and Frank had carried out the orders, but Keene had orchestrated the silencing of Daniel Whitaker. The faceless figure in Lily's drawing wasn't alive anymore, but his shadow still lingered. One last message. Just when investigators thought they had everything, Lily handed her mother one last drawing. It showed Daniel, standing this time, smiling faintly, holding hands with a small girl. Above them, she had drawn the sun. When asked what it meant, Lily said softly, "He says thank you. He can rest now." For Daniel's widow, it was the first moment of peace she had felt in 3 decades. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "We finally know." The case was about to explode into national headlines. Arrests were being prepared, charges filed, and decades of silence were about to shatter. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened after the arrests, what happened to Lily and her family once the dust settled, is something nobody expected. And it left everyone asking the same question. Was Lily truly the voice of a murdered man, or something far stranger? Before I take you into the chilling conclusion of this story, let me pause for one last time. If this story has you hooked and you want to see how it all ends, share it right now. Bring more people into this moment, because the ending will leave you questioning everything you think you know. Justice and the unanswered question. The arrests came quickly. In the early hours of a cold autumn morning, police descended on 2 houses simultaneously. At one, they found Rick Halpern, the former coach who had lived 3 decades under the weight of a secret he thought was buried forever. At the other, they took Frank Dillard, the ex-manager whose scarred face had been immortalized in a child's crayon drawing. The men were shocked, furious, indignant, but when shown the recovered knife, the hidden documents, and the cassette tape in Daniel Whitaker's own voice, both fell silent. The case that had haunted a family, a town, and an entire generation of investigators was finally cracked open. The trial. The trial was one of the most sensational the county had ever seen. Crowds lined up outside the courthouse, reporters jostled for position, and the story spread nationally. Cold case solved by a child's drawing. Prosecutors laid out the case. Daniel Whitaker had stumbled onto corruption at the chemical plant, threatening to go public. Rick Halpern and Frank Dillard, under the direction of powerful industrialist Arthur Keene, lured Daniel out, killed him, and staged the scene to look like a random attack. For decades, they had hidden behind money, silence, and intimidation. But the smallest, most unexpected witness had brought it all crashing down. The jury took less than 2 days. Both men were found guilty of murder. For Daniel's widow, who sat in the courtroom clutching her children's hands, it was the closest thing to closure she would ever get. When the verdict was read, she whispered through tears, "Danny, you can rest now." Lily's freedom. Through it all, Lily remained strangely calm. She was shielded from the courtroom and never testified, but her drawings had become the heart of the case. Her mother worried constantly about the toll it had taken. For months, Lily had woken up screaming, muttering words she couldn't understand, drawing scenes no child should ever know. But after the verdict, something remarkable happened. One morning, her mother walked into her room and found Lily drawing again. Only this time, it wasn't knives, or bodies, or faceless men. It was a simple picture of a family standing together under a bright sun. When asked about it, Lily smiled softly and said, "He doesn't talk to me anymore." The chilling twist. It seemed like the story had reached its end. Justice served, a family given peace, and a little girl freed from the burden of carrying a dead man's story. But then came the twist. Several weeks later, Lily's mother received an envelope in the mail. Inside was one sheet of paper, a drawing, unmistakably in Lily's style, but not made by Lily. It was of a man, lying face down, a pool of red spreading beneath him. But this time, the man wasn't Daniel Whitaker. It was someone else. And scrawled at the bottom of the page were 3 chilling words. "I'm not done." The police investigated. They couldn't trace where the envelope had come from. Lily swore she hadn't drawn it. Her crayons were accounted for. So who had? Was Daniel's spirit still reaching out? Was another victim trying to speak through Lily, or someone else entirely? Or had the killer's secrets run deeper than anyone realized? The case was closed, but the mystery wasn't. The emotional ending. Daniel Whitaker's murder had been solved in the most unimaginable way, through the crayons of a child. His killers faced justice, his widow had answers, and his story was finally told. But for Lily's mother, one question would never leave her. Had her daughter been chosen, in some impossible way, to carry the voice of the dead? And if so, was it truly over? Because sometimes, when she passed Lily's room late at night, she still heard the faint scratch of crayon on paper. And sometimes, she swore she heard her daughter whispering back. And that's where this story ends, or maybe, where it begins again. If this story sent chills down your spine and left you wondering about what's real and what isn't, make sure you're subscribed right now. Because I always bring you stories that twist reality, haunt your thoughts, and leave you questioning everything.